October 25, 1944, just before 11 o'clock in the morning, the Philippine Sea, east of the island of Samar. The light catches first on a single Zero fighter, 2,300 feet above a flat grey ocean. In its cockpit sits 23-year-old Japanese officer named Yukio Seki. 5 months earlier, he married a young woman named Mariko Watanabe. He has not seen her since the wedding. Now he banks his fighter, looks down through scattered cloud at the wakes of 6 American escort carriers, and selects the one he will fly into. The carrier he picks is USS St. Lo. Below decks, more than 100 Americans are about to die. This is the moment most people start the story of the kamikaze. But it is not where the story actually begins, and what will eventually destroy his successors over Okinawa 6 months from now is not a fighter plane or a battleship. It is something smaller than a milk bottle, hidden inside an American shell that the Japanese will never understand in time. To understand what is about to unfold above the deck of USS Lo, you have to travel back 4 years, across an ocean, to a quiet brick laboratory on the campus of the Carnegie Institution in Washington, D.C. The date is August 1940. A man named Vannevar Bush, recently appointed head of the new National Defense Research Committee, summons a 39-year-old physicist named Merle Tuve. Tuve is the son of a Norwegian immigrant. He was born in South Dakota. He has spent his career studying the ionosphere, bouncing radio waves off the upper atmosphere. He is quiet, methodical, deeply religious, and he is about to be asked to do something the British have already given up on. Bush hands him a problem. Build a fuse, he says. Build a fuse that can sense when an enemy aircraft is close, and detonate at exactly that distance. No timers, no guesswork. A shell that knows when to explode. Tuve listens. He does the math. The fuse would need to contain a working radio transmitter and receiver, vacuum tubes, batteries, a switch, all of it packed into a space smaller than a pint of milk. It would need to survive being fired from a 5-inch naval gun at 2,600 feet per second, while spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute under 20,000 times the force of gravity. The British have studied the problem and concluded it cannot be done. Tuve takes the assignment. He gathers a small team, Section T. They begin working out of converted laboratory space at the Carnegie Institution and later at a new facility at Johns Hopkins called the Applied Physics Laboratory. They will work in absolute secrecy for the next 4 years. Most of America will never hear of them. 3 years pass. By June 1943, in a different office, in a different empire, a different officer is also writing about a weapon that has never existed. His name is Eiichiro Jyo. He is 43 years old, a captain in the Imperial Japanese Navy, a career aviator, a man who has watched Japan lose Midway. A man who has watched the experienced pilots of his service die faster than the academies can replace them. He has come to a conclusion that he writes down, by hand, in a memorandum to the Naval General Staff. The conclusion is this: Japan cannot defeat the United States with conventional tactics. The Americans build aircraft faster than Japan can shoot them down. The arithmetic is settled. Therefore, Joe writes, Japan must consider what he calls a special attack, pilots who do not return. Aircraft used as guided weapons, human beings deliberately turned into ammunition. The memorandum is filed. The Naval General Staff reads it. They do not act, not yet. And here is the first thing most people do not know. While Captain Jyo is writing his memorandum in Tokyo in June of 1943, Merle Tuve's secret weapon has already been killing Japanese pilots for 5 months, January 5, 1943. Off the coast of Guadalcanal, the light cruiser USS Helena spots an inbound Japanese Val dive bomber. Her aft 5-inch battery fires 3 salvos. The shells do not strike the aircraft. They do not need to, they simply pass close enough, and the Val comes apart in the air. This is the first combat kill ever recorded by a proximity-fused shell. The fuse is so secret that the United States Navy has imposed a rule on its use that borders on paranoia. The shells may be fired only over water, never over land. If one fails to detonate and falls intact, the Germans or the Japanese might recover it, reverse engineer it, build their own. For 21 months, while the kamikaze tactic does not yet exist, the proximity fuse quietly strips the sky over the Pacific of Japanese aircraft. Pilots see their wingmen explode without being hit. They report it to their commanders. The commanders cannot explain it. Japanese naval intelligence opens a file. The file fills slowly with unanswered questions. By the time Yukio Seki banks his 0 over USS St. Lo, the technology that will eventually destroy his successors has already been hunting his comrades for nearly 2 years. He does not know this. Nobody on the Japanese side knows this. October 1944, the Philippines. Japan has lost the Battle of the Philippine Sea. 4 months earlier, in 2 days of fighting, she lost over 400 aircraft. The cream of her naval aviation is gone. Onto this stage walks Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi. He is 53 years old, a career aviator, a heavy drinker, a man known for blunt speech and harder decisions. He arrives at Mabalacat Airfield, north of Manila, to take command of the 1st Air Fleet. He looks at his inventory, roughly 40 serviceable aircraft. Most of his pilots have under 100 hours of flight time. He is being asked to defeat the largest invasion force in human history. On the night of October 19th, in a small stucco building at the edge of the airfield, Onishi gathers his senior officers. He tells them there is only one tactic left. He uses the words that Captain Joe had written 16 months earlier in Tokyo, Tokubetsu Kogeki, special attack. He proposes that pilots fly their aircraft, with bombs still attached, directly into the decks of American aircraft carriers. The officers in the room do not refuse. A unit is formed, 24 men. They are organized into 4 sections named Shikishima, Yamato, Asahi, and Yamazakura. The names are taken from a poem written more than a century earlier about the Japanese soul. To lead Shikishima, the first to fly, Onishi's staff selects a young lieutenant from the 70th class of the Etajima Naval Academy. His name is Yukio Seki. The selection happens at night. Seki is woken in his quarters and called to a meeting. He is told what he has been chosen for. He is given time to consider. A journalist named Masashi Onoda is at Mabalacat in those days. Onoda later writes that he spoke with Seki in a corner of the officers' quarters after the lamps had been lowered. According to Onoda's account, Seki was not exalted. He was not eager. He spoke quietly. He told the journalist that Japan was finished if she had to kill a pilot like him this way. He said he was not going for the emperor and not for the empire. He was going, he said, for his wife. There are reasons to be cautious about exact words spoken 80 years ago. Memoirs are not transcripts, but Onoda's account is consistent with the letters Seki wrote in his final days. It is consistent with the testimony of the men who saw him at takeoff. What we can say with certainty is this. The young man chosen to lead the first organized suicide attack in modern military history did not go willingly. He went because he was ordered to go. And because, having been ordered, he could find no honorable way to refuse. The kamikaze as a tactic was not built on fanaticism. It was built on resignation. The morning of October 25, 1944, is overcast across the central Philippines. At Mabalacat, Seki and his 5-aircraft Shikishima unit share a final cup of sake before dawn. They climb into their Zeros. Each fighter carries a single 250-kilogram bomb wired to detonate on impact. They take off at 7:25, 300 miles to the northeast. At almost the same hour, Captain Eiichiro Joe is on the bridge of the carrier Chiyoda. His ship has been steaming as part of Admiral Ozawa's decoy force, sent to lure Admiral Halsey's fleet away from the landings at Leyte. The trick has worked too well. Halsey has taken the bait. Aircraft from Task Force 38 had hit Chiyoda earlier that same morning. By midday, her engines are dead. She is drifting on fire, abandoned by her escorts. By the afternoon, a force of American cruisers under Rear Admiral Lawrence Dubose closes the range and sinks her with gunfire. Captain Joe, who 16 months earlier had been the first senior Japanese officer to put down on paper the idea of organized suicide attacks, goes down with his ship. He is 44 years old. It is almost certain he never learned that his proposal had been adopted. 300 miles to the west, at almost the same moment his carrier slides under, the first of his recommended attackers is finding his target. Yukio Seki tips his Zero into a dive. Below him, USS St. Lo is in the middle of recovering aircraft. Her flight deck is open, packed with fueled and armed planes. He hits her on the port side of the flight deck. The bomb penetrates to the hangar deck and detonates among the parked aircraft. Within seconds, the secondary explosions begin. Stored ordnance cooks off. fuel lines rupture. The carrier becomes, in the span of half a minute, a burning corridor of survivors trying to lift hatches that are now too hot to touch. She sinks in 30 minutes. 143 Americans are dead. In the days that follow, the United States Pacific Fleet does the math. Conventional Japanese air attacks during the Philippine campaign have been achieving hit rates of around 2%. Of every 100 aircraft sent against American ships, 98 miss, are shot down before they can release their bombs, or never find a target. The first wave of kamikaze attacks, in the days after October 25th, achieves a hit rate that approaches 1 in 3. For the first time in the Pacific War, the arithmetic of attrition shifts in Japan's favor. 1-0, worth perhaps $30,000, and one minimally trained pilot, can destroy an American escort carrier worth $30 million and full of sailors. Word reaches Washington within the week. It reaches Vannevar Bush. It reaches Merle Tuve. In the quiet brick laboratory at Johns Hopkins, the men who have spent 4 years perfecting the proximity fuse now understand exactly what their weapon is going to be used for. The fuse that has until now fired only over open water against bombers and torpedo planes is about to be released in numbers no one has yet imagined. The next phase of the Pacific War will not be decided by aircraft, it will not be decided by ships. It will be decided by a glass vacuum tube the size of a fingernail, and by a 20-year-old boy in a Japanese cockpit who does not yet know what is waiting for him in the sky over Okinawa. The story shifts now, 300 miles, 6 months, and one decision that will change everything. April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday morning. The largest amphibious operation in the history of the Pacific begins on the western beaches of an island most Americans had never heard of. The island is Okinawa. 600 miles north, the home islands of Japan are waiting. Tokyo, Yokohama, the factories, the shipyards, the Emperor's Palace. Okinawa is the last door. Take Okinawa and the invasion of Japan itself becomes inevitable. By dawn, more than 1,300 Allied vessels ride at anchor off the beaches, battleships, carriers, cruisers, destroyers. Transports full of Marines who will spend the next 82 days fighting their way across an island the size of Long Island. And on the picket line, 16 miles out from the main fleet, sit the destroyers. They are the early warning system. The first line, each one positioned alone in the ring around the fleet. Each one carrying the radar that will detect incoming aircraft and the 5-inch guns that will try to stop them. The destroyer captains know what is coming. They have read the after-action reports from the Philippines. They have seen the photographs of USS St. Lo. They have heard the word the Japanese have given their tactic, kamikaze, the divine wind. What no destroyer captain in the picket line yet knows is that a few miles offshore, in the magazines of every American warship, sit thousands of small electronic devices that have already changed the rules of naval combat. They are about to discover what their guns can do. So are the men coming to kill them. 11 days before the first kamikaze rises against the Okinawa fleet, on the morning of March 21, 1945, 63 Japanese aircraft lift off from Kanoya Airfield on the southern tip of Kyushu. 18 of them are Mitsubishi G4M bombers. The Americans call them Betties. Each Betty carries something slung beneath its belly that no American pilot has ever seen before. A small aircraft, 20 feet long, white and grey, a single cockpit, 3 rocket motors in the tail, a warhead in the nose containing 1,200 kilograms of high explosive. It is called Oka. Cherry Blossom. The American Navy will give it another name. They will call it Baka, the Japanese word for fool. The Oka has no engine for sustained flight. It must be carried into range of the American fleet by a Betty bomber, then released. After release, the pilot ignites the rocket motors, and the small aircraft accelerates to nearly 600 miles per hour in its terminal dive. At that speed against a destroyer, it cannot be stopped. That is the theory. The man who designed the Oka is a young Imperial Navy ensign named Mitsuo Ohta. He drew up the concept in August of 1944. The first test flight occurred in October. By March of 1945, the weapon is being sent into combat for the first time. Leading the mission is a 41-year-old lieutenant commander named Goro Nonaka. Nonaka commands a unit that has named itself Jinrai Butai, the Thunder Gods. Before takeoff, Nonaka gathers his pilots. He does not give a speech. He looks at the 18 men who will fly the Okas, and he looks at the men who will fly the Bettys carrying them, and he tells them in so many words that this is the day they die. The formation lifts off from Kanoya, 18 Bettys, 30 Zero fighters as escort. They climb to 18,000 feet and head south toward an American task force operating off Kyushu. What they do not know is that an American radar picket has already detected them. The contact is relayed to Task Force 58. Hellcat fighters from USS Hornet are launched to intercept. The Hellcats find the Japanese formation roughly 60 miles short of the American fleet. The Bettys, weighed down by their Oka payloads, cannot maneuver. The Japanese commanders, recognizing what is about to happen, order the Okas released early, hoping the suicide pilots can glide the remaining distance to the American ships. It is not possible. The Okas have no range without their mothership. They fall into the sea. Within 30 minutes, all 18 Bettys are destroyed. A few of the Zero escorts make it back to Kanoya. Nonaka does not. The first operational mission of the most expensive suicide weapon in the Japanese arsenal ends without a single Oka reaching a target. The Thunder Gods, on their first day in combat, are erased. It will be 3 weeks before the Imperial Navy admits the scale of the disaster to its own commanders. By then, Operation Kikusui will already have begun. April 6, 1945. The skies over southern Kyushu are grey and overcast. At Kanoya Airfield, Vice Admiral Motomi Ugaki watches his pilot's taxi onto the runway. He is 55 years old, a small man with a careful mustache. A man who keeps a diary every night. In a leather-bound book he calls Sensoroku, the seaweed record, a title borrowed from the writings of an ancient samurai. He has been at Kanoya since February. He commands the 5th Air Fleet. He has been given operational control of every kamikaze unit in the Japanese home islands. The plan he is about to execute is the largest coordinated suicide attack in the history of warfare, Operation Kikusui, the floating chrysanthemum. The symbol of a 14th century samurai who chose death over surrender at the Battle of Minatogawa. There will be 10 Kikusui operations between April and June. Today is the first. 391 Navy aircraft, 133 Army aircraft. Of those, 297 are suicide aircraft. Each carries a young man who has been told that he will not return. The pilots are not what they were in 1942. The veterans are dead, killed at Midway. At the Coral Sea, at the Marianas. The pilots taking off from Kanoya this morning have, on average, less than 100 flight hours. Some have less than 50. Many of them are university students. In October of 1943, the Empire of Japan had suspended deferments for students of the humanities and called them into uniform. The mobilization was given a name. Gakuto Shutsujin, the students go to war. Some of those students are taxiing past Ugaki's reviewing stand right now. They will fly into walls of fire none of their commanders have prepared them for. Within hours of the first launch, American radar pickets, 16 miles out from the main fleet off Okinawa, begin to track incoming contacts. Not dozens, hundreds. The pickets open fire at maximum range, 12,000 yards. The 5-inch guns of the destroyers begin to hammer the sky, and the shells in flight begin to think. USS Laffey is a Sumner-class destroyer, 2,200 tons, a crew of 336 men. Her commanding officer is Commander Frederick Julian Beckton. Beckton is 36 years old. Annapolis, class of 1931, quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of officer who corrects his subordinates without raising his voice. On the morning of April 16, 1945, USS Laffey is on Radar Picket Station 1. She is 16 miles north of Okinawa. She is alone except for 2 landing craft providing close-in fire support. At 7:44 in the morning, her radar operators see what is coming. 50 contacts, then more. The plot board fills faster than the operators can track. Beckton orders general quarters. The 5-inch turrets train out. The 40mm Bofors mounts swing into position. The 20mm Ehrlichons clear their barrels. Then the Japanese arrive. Aichi D3A Vals, Nakajima Ki 43 Oscars, Mitsubishi Zero fighters, Yokosuka D4Y Judis. Some of them have been pulled out of training schools and pressed into service. Some of them are flying aircraft so worn that the engines are running on tolerances that would have been rejected 3 years earlier. They have one job: find a ship, crash into it. What follows is the longest sustained kamikaze attack ever inflicted on a single American warship, 80 minutes, 22 aircraft. The first comes in low over the water, level with the bridge. Laffey's after 5-inch mount fires 3 rounds. The shells fly past the aircraft. They do not strike it. The proximity fuses sense it. The shells detonate in a burst of black smoke and steel fragments. The valve falls into the sea 200 yards from the ship. The second aircraft is shredded in the same way. The third, the fourth. By 8 in the morning, the deck of USS Laffey is littered with spent 5-inch shell casings. The gun crews are sweating through their dungarees. The barrels of the aftermount are too hot to touch. They keep firing. 345 rounds of 5-inch ammunition will leave the ship's guns over the next 80 minutes. Every shell carries one of Merle Tuve's proximity fuses. 9 Japanese aircraft are destroyed outright by Laffey's guns. 6 are not. At 8:27, a kamikaze hits the aft gun mount. The bomb detonates. The mount jams. 5 minutes later, a second aircraft strikes the deck house, then a third, then a fourth. The fires spread across the stern. Steam pipes rupture. The rudder jams in a hard left position. The ship begins to steam in slow circles, burning, while the kamikazes keep coming. A junior officer climbs to the bridge. He asks Commander Beckton if he should pass the word to prepare to abandon ship. Beckton looks at him. "I will never abandon ship while a gun can still fire," he says. The forward 5-inch mounts continue to fire. By the time the last Japanese aircraft is destroyed, 80 minutes after the first contact, USS Laffey has been hit by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs. She is on fire from amidships to the fantail, but she is still afloat. 32 of her crew are dead, 71 are wounded. She is still afloat because 9 of the 22 Japanese aircraft never reached her. Because of small glass vacuum tubes and miniature radio transmitters built in a laboratory in Maryland, fired from 5-inch guns by gun crews who never had to set a single mechanical timer. The Japanese name for what happens that morning is incomprehension. That night, 60 miles to the north, in his command bunker at Kanoya, Motomi Ugaki opens his diary. He writes in careful brushstrokes. The handwriting is calm. The content is not. He notes the number of aircraft launched. He notes the number that did not return. He notes that returning escort pilots have reported seeing Japanese suicide aircraft destroyed at unusually long distances from American ships by anti-aircraft shells that appear to detonate in mid-air with extraordinary precision. The enemy's defensive firepower, he writes, has increased remarkably. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at distances previously considered safe. He closes the diary. He does not yet understand what is killing his pilots, but Japanese naval intelligence is starting to find clues. Months earlier, in the autumn of 1944, a Japanese fishing boat operating in the waters near Saipan recovered the fragments of an American 5-inch shell that had failed to detonate. The fragments were sent to the Naval Technical Research Institute outside Tokyo. What the technicians found inside the nose of the shell did not match anything in their understanding of artillery. There were vacuum tubes, there was a battery, there were small radio components. A report was written. It was sent up the chain of command. The conclusion was tentative. The American shells, the report said, appeared to contain miniature radar sets. The Japanese scientists understood the concept. What they did not understand was the principle, the Doppler shift. The continuous radio wave that measured its own returning frequency. The mathematics that allowed a shell to know when an aircraft was within 70 feet of its trajectory and to detonate at that exact instant. It took American physicists and engineers 4 years and over $1 billion to perfect. It would take Japanese scientists in the spring of 1945 considerably longer than the war would last. Ugaki, in his bunker at Kanoya, does not have the intelligence report on his desk. Even if he did, he could do nothing with it. Japan does not have the industrial capacity to manufacture vacuum tubes that can survive 20,000 times the force of gravity. Japan does not have the radio engineers. Japan does not have the precision glass. Japan does not have time. Ugaki understands only the outcome. Hit rates are falling. Pilots are dying farther from their targets. The arithmetic that justified the kamikaze tactic in October of 1944 is collapsing, but Ugaki does what his superiors have ordered him to do. He sends more pilots. He sends Kikusui 2, Kikusui 3, Kikusui 4. By mid-May, the Imperial Japanese Navy will have launched more than 1,500 suicide aircraft against the American fleet at Okinawa. The hit rate by the end of April has fallen below 1 in 10. By mid-May it will fall below 1 in 20. Ugaki keeps writing in his diary every night. The entries grow shorter. The men keep dying. May 11th, 1945. 75 miles east of Okinawa. USS Bunker Hill is the flagship of Task Force 58. She is an Essex class fleet carrier. 27,000 tons. 3,000 officers and men. On board, in his flag quarters, sits Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commanding the Fast Carrier Force. It is mid-morning. The carrier has just completed launching a strike against airfields on Kyushu. The deck is open, aircraft are being refueled, pilots are eating breakfast in the wardroom. 2 Japanese aircraft, a Zero and a Judy, approach the carrier from low altitude, hidden in the clutter of the recovery pattern. Bunker Hill's escorting destroyers fire. The proximity-fused shells destroy 3 other Japanese aircraft in the same minute, but the 2 attacking the carrier are too close. The Zero strikes first. A bomb releases just before impact and detonates among the parked aircraft on the flight deck. The fighter itself plows through the deck and into the sea on the other side. 30 seconds later, the Judy hits. It crashes through the flight deck near the island. The bomb penetrates to the gallery deck before exploding. Fires spread instantly through the aircraft fueling system. Burning gasoline pours down through ventilator shafts into the spaces below. The ready room for the fighter squadron is consumed in less than a minute. The men inside have no time to move. 393 sailors die. Vice Admiral Mitcher survives. His staff is decimated. USS Bunker Hill does not sink. She is too well built and too well crewed to sink. She limps back across the Pacific, then to Puget Sound for repairs, and she does not see combat again. Mitcher transfers his flag to USS Enterprise 3 days later. After the war, the analysts will study what happened at Bunker Hill. They will note that the proximity-fused fire from her escorts shot down 3 aircraft that were almost certainly attempting to attack the same target. If those 3 aircraft had reached Bunker Hill, the carrier would have been lost. In that calculation, in that single morning, the proximity fuse is the difference between a damaged ship and a sunken one. Between 393 dead and a number too painful to compute. By late May of 1945, the United States Pacific Fleet has begun to keep careful statistics on what its weapons are doing. Each engagement is logged, each kill is verified, each round of ammunition expended is counted. The numbers tell a story. 5-inch shells with conventional time fuses fired at a kamikaze require an average of 1,162 rounds to destroy each attacker. The same shells fitted with Merle Tuve's proximity fuse require 310, nearly 4 times more effective, a 73% reduction in the ammunition required to save a ship. By June, American factories are producing 70,000 proximity fuses every day. The total wartime production will exceed 22 million units. The cost, which was $732 per fuse when the first units came off the line in 1942, has fallen to $18 by the spring of 1945. $18. That is what it cost the United States in the final months of the war to manufacture the small electronic device that, fitted to a shell, can destroy a Japanese aircraft and the pilot inside it. The pilot is a 20-year-old man. He has been pulled out of a humanities classroom at a Japanese university. He has been trained for 2.5 months. He has been issued a Hachimaki headband, sometimes a sword, and a Zero fighter built in 1942. He has been told that the Empire is counting on him. The aircraft he flies costs Japan, in 1945 currency, the equivalent of several $100,000 to produce. The fuse that kills him costs $18. The difference, multiplied across the more than 1,700 suicide aircraft that Japan will send against the American fleet at Okinawa, is the difference between a defensible American position and an indefensible one. Between a Pacific the United States can hold and one it cannot. The Japanese High Command knows this by the end of May. The hit rate has fallen below 10%. The arithmetic that made the kamikaze tactic seem like a desperate but rational answer to overwhelming American firepower has collapsed. What replaces it is not rational. The orders to mobilize more young men continue. The university classrooms continue to empty, the training programs are shortened, the aircraft are older, the pilots have less time in the air, the Imperial Navy is no longer trying to win. It is trying not to admit that it has lost. And in his bunker at Kanoya, Matomi Ugaki, who keeps writing in his diary every night, who knows now exactly how few of his pilots are reaching American ships, who has been told by his superiors to continue sending them, has begun, in the quiet pages of his journal, to plan the only act he can imagine that will allow him to face the men he has sent to die. He has begun to plan his own last flight, but that comes later. For now, in May of 1945, the men keep flying, the shells keep thinking. The war keeps narrowing toward a conclusion that no Japanese commander has yet allowed himself to put on paper. June 22, 1945, Okinawa. After 82 days of fighting, the island is declared secured. The cost has been the bloodiest the United States Pacific Fleet has ever paid. 36 ships sunk, 368 damaged, 4,907 American sailors killed. The largest single cause is the kamikaze. For the Japanese, the numbers are different in kind. Approximately 1,900 suicide aircraft launched in 10 Kikusui operations, almost every pilot dead. Almost every aircraft destroyed. In the bunker at Kanoya, Vice Admiral Matomi Ugaki closes his diary on the night Okinawa falls and writes that the war is now in its final phase and that nothing can be salvaged but honor. He does not write down what he is planning. 6 weeks later, on the morning of August 6th, a single B-29 named Enola Gay drops a uranium weapon over Hiroshima. On the 9th, a plutonium weapon falls on Nagasaki. On the 15th, at noon Tokyo time, the Japanese people hear the voice of their emperor for the first time in their lives on a recording broadcast over national radio. He says the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. He says the unendurable must be endured. He does not use the word surrender. He does not need to. Across the empire, officers begin to take off their swords, most of them. At an airfield called Oita on the eastern coast of Kyushu, Vice Admiral Matomi Ugaki, having heard the broadcast, walks out of his quarters and into the operations building. He is wearing his dark green flight uniform. He has removed every insignia of rank. He keeps only a short sword, given to him years earlier by his old friend Takejiro Onishi. 11 Yokosuka Suisei dive bombers are fueled and waiting on the apron. The orders received from Imperial headquarters less than 2 hours earlier are unambiguous. All operations are to cease. All aircraft are to remain on the ground. Ugaki ignores them. He walks to the lead aircraft. He climbs into the observer's seat behind the pilot. He looks at the young men who have come to die with him. They take off into a clear afternoon. The formation turns south toward Okinawa. Some of the aircraft will turn back with mechanical trouble. Others will continue, including the one carrying Ugaki. What happens after that is recorded only in fragments. American radar operators report contacts that afternoon. American picket ships report distant explosions. No confirmed hits are logged. Weeks later, on the small island of Ihaya, north of Okinawa, Japanese remains are found at the site of a crashed Suisei. Among them is the body of a man wearing a flight uniform with no insignia. It is the final kamikaze attack of the Second World War. It is led by the officer who sent 1,900 others to perform exactly this act before him. He has done, at the very end, what he asked of all of them. The next night, in a small house in the Shibuya district of Tokyo, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi sits down at a low table. He is 54 years old. He has written 2 notes. One is to his wife. The second, longer, is addressed to the spirits of his dead pilots. He thanks them. He says they fought and died with faith in their nation. He says that he, by failing to deliver the victory for which they died, owes them a debt that cannot be repaid by any other means. He addresses the surviving young people of Japan. He tells them to rebuild their country. He tells them to do it, this time, in peace. He places the notes on the table. He takes out the short tanto blade and performs the ritual cut across his abdomen. Then he cuts his own throat. Then he cuts the artery at his groin. He has dismissed the man who would normally stand behind him with a long sword to deliver the merciful blow that ends suffering. He does not want it ended. He bleeds for 15 hours. When friends find him in the morning, he is still conscious. He waves away the doctor. He refuses morphine. He dies in the late afternoon of August 16th. The man who created the kamikaze has ended his life apologizing to the kamikaze. He has died alone by his own choice in the longest suicide of the war. 5,000 miles east, in a brick laboratory in Maryland, the man who built the weapon that destroyed Onishi's pilots is not celebrating. Merle Tuve, by the late summer of 1945, knows what his proximity fuse has done. He has read the after-action reports. He has read the casualty statistics. He has read the letter that Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commander of the Okinawa Amphibious Force, sent to the Chief of Naval Operations. Without the VT fuse, Turner wrote, "Our losses from suicide attacks would have been unbearable." In September, President Truman lifts the wartime classification on the proximity fuse. Newspapers across the country carry the story. The President praises the device as one of the most important secret weapons of the war. The Secretary of the Navy issues a statement. The proximity fuse has helped blaze the trail to Japan, James Forrestal says. Without the protection it has given our ships, the cost in men and ships would have been immeasurably greater. Merle Tuve does not give a speech. He returns to his work at the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism, where he had been employed since the 1920s. He puts away the wartime papers. He resumes the research he had been doing in 1940, before Vannevar Bush called him into the room with the impossible problem. He studies the upper atmosphere. He builds radio telescopes. He helps lay the foundation of a field that does not yet have a name in 1945, radio astronomy. The same continuous wave Doppler shift that he used in the nose of a 5-inch shell to detect the approach of a Japanese aircraft within 70 feet of its trajectory will be used in the decades after the war to measure the distance of receding galaxies. The technology that allowed an American sailor to see an enemy pilot dying at 12,000 yards becomes the technology that allows mankind to see across billions of light years of space. Tuve lives until 1982. He is asked in a few interviews over those 37 years about his role in the proximity fuse. His answers are short. By his own later account, he framed it simply. They had saved lives, he said, by making weapons more effective. Every kamikaze shot down by a proximity fuse was an American sailor who went home to his family. That was worth any amount of effort. He never describes the work in detail. He never writes a memoir. He does not, in any interview that survives him, mention the pilots on the other end of the trajectory. The numbers of the war are clear and they are cold. The United States Navy lost more men at Okinawa than in any other battle in its history. 4,907 sailors did not come home. Their names are on stones in towns from Maine to California. Some of them are on stones in towns that no longer exist, in counties whose populations dropped after the war and never recovered. The proximity fuse did not save those men. It saved many others. It saved, by careful Navy estimates, dozens of ships that would otherwise have been lost. It saved, by the same estimates, thousands of sailors who would otherwise have died with those ships. It also killed with mathematical precision several thousand Japanese pilots. Most of those pilots were under 25 years old. Many of them did not want to die. Their names are written in registers kept in shrines on Kyushu, in archives at the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo, in private family memorials that no foreign historian will ever see. They were killed by a glass vacuum tube the size of a fingernail, built in Cincinnati, tested in Maryland, fired by a Brooklyn boy or a farm kid from Iowa standing at a 5-inch gun, who never had to do the math, never had to set a timer, never had to see the face of the man at the end of the trajectory. In the rhythm of modern war, that distance was the entire point. The pilot in the cockpit had to see his target. He had to fly toward it. He had to commit, with every second of his approach, to the act of his own death and the death of others. The sailor at the gun saw a contact on radar. He fired. The shell flew. The shell thought. The pilot disappeared in a puff of black smoke and steel fragments at the far edge of visibility, and the gun crew loaded another round. This is what the proximity fuse made possible, not the elimination of war, the mechanization of its decisive moments. In the years after 1945, military science around the world followed the road that Merle Tuve and Section T had opened. Anti-aircraft missiles, radar-guided artillery, smart bombs, the close-in weapon systems that today protect every American warship at sea-use principles that descend in a direct technical line from the small fuse that killed Yukio Seki's successors over Okinawa. The kamikaze, as a military tactic, did not survive its first real test against that technology. The young men who flew the missions did not survive at all. The story we tell about them in books and in films is often a story about fanaticism, about a culture willing to die for an emperor. It is sometimes a story we tell to make ourselves feel safer about what happened to them. The historical record is more complicated. The men who designed the proximity fuse understood, by the spring of 1945, that they were not winning a fair fight. They had built something so far beyond their opponent's capacity to comprehend that the outcome of every engagement was decided before the engagement began. The men who flew the kamikaze missions in many cases also understood this. They flew anyway. They flew because they had been ordered to fly, because they could not face the men who would not, because they had been told by older men in better uniforms that there was no other way. There was another way. It was being held all that time in steel canisters in the magazines of American ships, marked only with cryptic letter codes, $18 apiece by the end. The other way was not death. The other way was an electronic switch in the nose of a shell that knew when to close.